All right, so we've gone from the Jackson house in Lexington, and we've now made our way over to the Oak Grove Cemetery, because if you're familiar with Thomas Stonewall Jackson, you know he dies of his wounds in battle in 1863, and he's reinterred in Lexington here at the Oak Grove Cemetery. So his grave should not be hard to find, but while we're here, there is a lot of history surrounding us, so many stories that we're going to just try to dive into a few of them, just to give you a sample of how much history is packed here in this cemetery. So we've just walked in the cemetery, and like I said, you're being hit with the history. Right over here rests William Nelson Pendleton. He was a clergyman of the Protestant Episcopal Church, then became Brigadier General of the Confederate Army, Chief of Artillery, Army of Northern Virginia, and was one of Lee's commissioners during the surrender at Appomattox. And of course, his wife is also buried here, and right next to it, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander S. Pendleton. He was an adjutant general in the 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia. Pendleton was essentially the top staff officer for General Jackson when Jackson was around, and continued service until he was killed at the Battle of Fisher's Hill on September 22nd, 1864, here in the Shenandoah Valley. So we just walked into the Oak Grove Cemetery in Lexington, and right by the gate, you have a grave for Lieutenant William Norgrove. He was born here in 1840 and died in Vicksburg on May 4th, 1863. It says he's buried in Vicksburg, so this may not actually be his. This may be a centograph, not actually his headstone, but it's very ornate, nevertheless. This obelisk here is for the Davidson family. It's for 3 different brothers, it appears like, at least on this side. One looks like died in infancy. The other 2, Greenlee Davidson, he served with Captain Letcher's artillery in Stonewall Jackson's corps and was killed at Chancellorsville. Same battle Jackson was actually killed, mortally wounded at, I should say. There underneath is his brother Frederick Davidson, who actually died a couple years earlier. He was in Rockbridge Rifles in the Stonewall Brigade at 1st Manassas. So he was killed in the first major land battle of the American Civil War. Walk around. Now, Oak Grove Cemetery in Lexington is, of course, famous for being the burial of General Jackson, but I mean, the history goes back at least another 100 years, because right over here we have Zacharian Johnston, who died in 1800 at 57 years of age, and is denoted as, at least he has an SAR placard on it. I am going to presume, though, that means he is a Rev War veteran. Here we have another casualty from the American Civil War. This is John Hartigan, died May 23rd, 1863, so really just at the cusp of the Gettysburg campaign. He was 27 years old, and he served in Company H of the 27th Virginia Regiment. Think of me as gone before. And the humble collector is just drawn to my attention. There is a veteran of the War of 1812 buried over here. Try my best to read it.
Yes.
It's a little hard to see.
So it looks like it's Samuel Dold here.
Samuel Dold.
It doesn't really have any extra info except he was born in 98.
And died in 1871. Or no, yeah, died in 83. Well, there's two. Which one?
Yeah, that's his wife there, Mrs. Ella Dold, and then
okay.
Sam Dold's here. So War of 1812, so he would have been 14.
Holy, wow.
Yeah. Must have been like a drummer or something.
And the humble collector was pointing out to me, just think that this crypt here has not been open in, I think, over a century. This is for the Hayden family, and they have them listed on both sides who's actually interred in the crypt here. The most recent burial in here I can find is 1906, I believe. I could look underneath here. No, 1913 actually. Still, that thing's been sealed for a century, essentially. So we found the headstone for Fletcher C. Brown here at Oak Grove. He's a Master Sergeant?
Yep,
Master Sergeant for the U.S. Army. World War I in Korea. Now, we've seen a couple graves that can show both World Wars in Korea, but there is no mention of World War II.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd.
I do not know what's going on here. doesn't look like he was killed in action. He just served in World War I in Korea and was not involved in World War II, apparently. At least the marker doesn't note it.
Yeah, he passed away 87.
Huh. I want to go do more research on this gentleman.
So somebody told me a while ago that apparently if you had prior military service, you were exempt from the draft for World War II.
Okay.
So it could be a situation where he served in World War I, decided not to volunteer for World War II, and then I guess something happened that he ended up going over to Korea.
Huh.
It's kind of an odd chain of events, though, for sure.
Wherever you go through here in the Oak Grove Cemetery in Lexington, everywhere you look around, there are Confederate veteran crosses, all the eyes can see. This is a town cemetery, so this is not like a proper soldier cemetery or anything, but there are veterans from the American Civil War, especially with Confederate forces, everywhere you look. It's a little bit overwhelming, to be quite honest, how compact the graves are in here. But we're, of course, looking for one person individual, and that is General Stonewall Jackson himself. Jackson left Lexington, Virginia to command a brigade in the Confederate Army in 1861. This is where he gets his biggest claim to fame. It's crazy to think that, you know, Jackson had this whole life, had this whole involvement both in the U.S. Army and the Mexican-American War, and then this decade of education here at VMI. That would be his larger legacy, truthfully. But the shortest amount of legacy he leaves is the most famous, when he becomes general in the Confederate Army in North Virginia. I mean, he's essentially the second in command of the whole army by 1863, second only to Robert E. Lee. And then in May of 1863, during the Battle of Chancellorsville, when Jackson coordinates a massive flanking attack on the Union flank on May the 2nd, 1863, some consider it one of the greatest tactical maneuvers in American military history. At the end of it, there's confusion, and he had to go out and he decided to go forward to the front lines to try to sort out the confusion as the Confederate and Union lines were entangled in the darkness in the wilderness. Well, he went too far forward and came under friendly fire and was mortally wounded as a result. He would linger for a few days after, but he would ultimately die May the 10th, 1863. And would be reinterred here at the Oak Grove Cemetery in Lexington, Virginia. Now, this is the monument on top of his grave. It's the most prominent marker in the Oak Grove Cemetery. You can't miss it. It's the middle of a rotunda, essentially. Now, what's interesting is there are multiple markers at the base of the monument, of course, for Stonewall Jackson himself, who's buried here. It also mentions about his infant daughter, Mary, who died just a few weeks after she was born. It says here that Mary is in the crypt with father, so it must be buried with Jackson. Then you got Jackson's second wife, Mary Ann Jackson. She lived until May 24th, 1915. And if you move over here, this is where things get really interesting. I don't know too much about these folks. You got Thomas Jonathan Jackson Christian, who is a brigadier general in the U.S. Army. He was born in 1888, passed away in 1952, and I presume is buried here. And then you have Thomas Jonathan Jackson Christian Jr., who was born in 1915, became a colonel, and was killed in action August 12, 1944, and body was never recovered. So that's just a centograph. And then Thomas Jonathan Jackson Preston, born in 1926 and died in 2020. So I presume there was a burial made here at the start of the thing we can't mention on the tube view.
Yeah, the thing that happened that we're not allowed to talk about, yeah.
That's crazy to find just what seems to be at least a recent marker, if not a recent burial, at this one of the most famous military graves in the United States of America. And over here you have Jackson's only surviving child. That was Julia Jackson Christian. She didn't live a long life. She was born in 1862. Only got to see her father as an infant twice. She would never have remembered it. And she died in 1889. But she did end up marrying William Edmund Christian, who lived until 1936. And since he married into the Jackson family, he is interred at the Jackson Monument. So what's very interesting is we have found the actual Jackson plot. And I did not actually know about this. So this is the historic Jackson family plot. You'll note there's a marker there telling you that Thomas Jackson, as well as his infant daughter, have been removed to be put in the crypt where the big monument is today. So the other folks that are denoted around the monument are not actually buried there, at least not to my knowledge, because it says right here, so this is actually Jackson's original headstone. Then this is his infant daughter's grave marker. So if we come over here, you're going to see a J. Winston Johns, founder of the Lee Jackson Memorial in 1953. And he was a member of the Virginia Military Institute. We got the graves for the Preston family over there, including Julia Jackson Christian Preston. Yeah, did not know about this. Yeah, this is the original Jackson family plot, and there are people interred here. Thomas Jackson himself has been reinterred underneath the monument. I believe, I could be mistaken, this is Julia Jackson Christian Preston. I believe this is the granddaughter of Thomas Jackson. I think she played a big role in actually preserving Jackson's home here in Lexington. And here's actually Jackson's first wife. She's buried right here, Eleanor. She died in 1854 in childbirth. Well, folks, that's going to conclude our stop here in Lexington, Virginia. Getting to walk in the footsteps of General Thomas Jackson, getting to see his home that he owned here in Lexington in the 1850s, and of course paying our respects to his grave right here at Oak Grove Cemetery. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button down below before we depart. If you want to follow us in future missions, be sure to subscribe here to Redoubt Productions. And if you want to go the extra mile supporting us, you can go to our Ko-fi page. Link is in the description below. And you may be asking, Redoubt, did your shirt change? Did you and Humble Collector's shirt change? Yes, we're filming this over a multi-day trip. So we've actually been stopping in Lexington multiple times as we go up and down the Shenandoah Valley. So sorry about the continuity if it throws you off. We're stitching this together. We weren't expecting really to spend so much time in Lexington on this trip. This was not the plan, but we've learned that Lexington, Virginia got a lot of history. I mean, more than we already were accustomed to. We're hoping we could come back in the future. So consider hanging around both of our channels and see if we get to come back and go really deep into the history here in Lexington, Virginia. That's all the time we got here. Thank you for watching. See you next time.